all-weather technology companies. So we're looking for companies that are going to do well regardless of whether or not there is a COVID lockdown or a recession or an inflationary environment or a stagflationary environment. We look for businesses with really strong pricing power. Labs will look more and more like Twitter meets Bloomberg, right? Where we're trying to make the data easier. We're also trying to drive a successful subscription business. And we know that there is no other source for the data. Data is always where all the value is in the tech industry in the long term. Google's a big data company, Amazon's a big data company, Microsoft, you name it, Amazon, these are all data companies in the long term. Richard Branson's a great guy, but Virgin Atlantic's gone bankrupt 3 times. Virgin Galactic, where do you think that's going to end up in the long term? It's going to rhyme with Virgin Atlantic, right? I think, Planet is the only space company with 9 figures of revenue. So if you want space and you want 100 million of revenue, it's only us. Virgin has no revenue. Our CEO at Planet Labs, Will Marshall, always says, we have 200 real satellites, Niccolo. They have 20 PowerPoint satellites. They intend to have a satellite next year or the year after. He's like, we had 200 last year, right? I think Europe should make a really darn good effort at trying to build some success in space, because you're correct. If you can't galvanize a common market around what's going on up in the heavens, you can't galvanize it for anything. The second thing that Europe has is a tremendous amount of scientific brain power that's underfunded, including my own school. Cambridge University and Oxford are great schools, but they don't have their own particle accelerator.
I'm Khaled Abouzar, your host, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Niccolo De Masi, CEO of dMY Technology Group, which is one of the leading, if not the best, SPAC franchise company on the market today. His latest SPAC was with Planet Labs, which is a company that provides satellite data and helps companies ranging from agricultural company to insurance companies get satellite imagery and utilize this data, as well as government. Niccolo, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time.
Honor and pleasure. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So Niccolo, you are a truly pioneer when it comes to mobile as well as deep tech. You've had, a lot of experience within these sectors. And so when you started dMY Technology, could you tell us more about why you were drawn towards this SPAC vehicles, and what is your vision and strategy when it comes to dMY Technology?
Yeah, so believe it or not, I've been working towards a SPAC franchise, I feel like, for the last 20 years of my career. The old joke is that it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. In the case of dMY, myself and my co-founder and partner, Harry Yu, probably have almost 60 years of public market experience. My partner, Harry, was the CFO of Oracle, Accenture, and EMC. And so I always jokingly say that Harry has spent his life with $100 billion market cap companies and greater. My career has all been in $10 billion market cap companies and smaller. But nevertheless, between the two of us, we have helped run the boards of 25 public companies. We've done something like 200 or 300 earnings call quarters. We've made about 200 acquisitions as public company leaders, and we've probably done 3 or 4 dozen IPOs and secondaries. So really our entire professional lives have been operating public companies. And the inspiration for the SPAC franchise comes from the fact that Harry Yu and Niccolo De Masi have both had a lot of success building public companies through acquisition. So we are used to, unlike almost everybody else in the ecosystem, we're very used to, as I like to jokingly say, being the ones left carrying the bag 2 years later whenever somebody makes a decision. So we're used to being the ones that get blamed if it doesn't work out. We're used to the ones that have to work hard to make things perform and fix things. And we're very used to communicating decisions and operating in the public company arena. So, dMY is very much a continuation of Harry and Niccolo's careers as operators, but we've reached the stages in our careers where we feel that we can add a lot more value as board members, active board members. And so, we wake up every day doing approximately 20 things for each of the companies that we've taken public. And all of them thematically fit within the same genre, which is we're looking for what we call all-weather technology companies. So we're looking for companies that are going to do well regardless of whether or not there is a COVID lockdown or a recession or an inflationary environment or a stagflationary environment. We look for businesses with really strong pricing power, because if you're a student of history or financial engineering, as it is in your case, you'll know that businesses that have a strong ability to pass on price because they have a unique barrier to entry product tend to perform very well throughout the business cycle. And so that's the theme from mobile to space to quantum computing. Each one of our businesses does something that no one else in the world can do. And we think that, that leads to great performance when the economy is going well. We think it leads to much better performance when the economy is in a tough spot than anybody else in the market. And we know for a fact in the last 2 years that all of our companies perform well during COVID. And so we're really not concerned about, pandemics. And ultimately, we've given the growth capital each one of our businesses needs to succeed in the long term. And when we're sitting on the board as value-added participants to make sure that they hit their business plans and hopefully exceed them, and then go on to fulfill their promise to be double-digit and hopefully someday triple-digit billion market cap companies someday.
And so when it comes to Planet Lab, which is the latest company acquired through the SPAC, if you look at this company, is it more around the company itself and the data that it provides to its customer in a recurrent way, or is it more of the sector that is of interest for you? So how does it balance? So because I see that you mentioned it more of a data company rather than a space company. So I was wondering if you see that the sector is of interest, or is it more of an opportunistic approach of a data company within the space sector?
Yeah. So it's always a bit of both. Believe it or not, we've now done 2 data companies that control their own hardware and control their data from the point of capture. Our second SPAC, Genius Sports, is effectively the leader in providing data to sports betting sites like DraftKings. And they have 250 or 60,000 events. They have the NFL exclusive to Genius. They have English Premier League. So there is not a wager that happens without paying Genius Sports a toll, a revenue share for that data being accurate from the stadium to the website to the bettor. Planet Labs is analogous to that. So they control data from the point of capture. In Planet's case, they control a scan of the entire Earth every day. And they have an additional 21 satellites that also can zoom in when you find a point of interest where instead of 3-meter resolution, you want 50-centimeter resolution or something like that. They can go deep as well as go broad. Planet's, I'd say in some ways, even more unique than Genius, because no one else in the world can capture the entire Earth at 3-meter resolution daily, and sometimes twice a day. And so it has huge applications in commerce, as you mentioned. It, of course, has huge applications in the defense sector as well. But believe it or not, what we think is interesting about both Planet Labs and Genius Sports is both companies are operating in sectors that are very young. So in the US, for sports betting, we've only liberalized, I think, 9 states for sports betting. Maybe it's 10, out of 50. And for Planet, very few companies are leveraging the power of Earth observation on a daily basis. There will be a day Maybe it takes till 2030, but at some point in the next decade, there'll be a day when even homeowners want to see what's going on in their neighborhood and want to see what's going on in their house and their property and maybe their friend's house. I don't know. I don't know, this will work, but there will be a consumer application someday of Planet Labs data. But between where we are today, where both Genius and Planet are, it's they're both 9-figure revenue businesses. They will both be, I'm sure, 10-figure revenue businesses someday. But that journey from 100 million to $1 billion of revenue passes through selling to a lot of enterprise customers. And so that's where Planet is right now. That's where Genius is. They're building their sales team. They're building out the customer presence. They're building out the granularity and power of their data. And they're adding more software tools and technology and machine learning on top of their data to make it more useful to more customers more of the time with lower friction, right? The goal, if you're a data company, is to get everybody to use it a lot every day and to build more and more value-added software on top of it so that derivatives of your data builds a new market, right? At the end of the day, that's what data companies do. And Bloomberg is a great example of a data company. We're trying to be analogous to that, except that both Genius and Planet, they own their own data. It's not like Bloomberg where they aggregate it. Planet Labs and Genius Sports control data at the point of capture. Nobody else has it, right? And so that's really, really powerful, I think, when you're looking at, will a business be a good investment? I always say there's kind of 3 things that matter for a dMY all-weather company. Big barriers to entry, huge TAM, and a lot of ways to win. If you have a big lead and a big market and a lot of ways to win, you're going to be a big business because you have the time to capture that addressable market. So we look for those 3 things, regardless of the sector, every single time we do a deal.
And so you have a strong experience in launching and managing mobile apps. And if you look at how this business has been built, you have the infrastructure and the layers on top. And I believe as well, Mark Benioff of Salesforce is an investor in the PIPE with your SPAC. And if you look at Salesforce as well, I mean, they've created $1 billion businesses in the same way. And so do you see Planet Labs and space sector more of a vertically integrated business where winner takes all, or will Planet Labs potentially also empower new entrepreneurs to create businesses?
That's a good question. I think both Genius and Planet Labs are winner takes most. That's the way technology markets tend to work, right? These days, the really big tech companies are growing faster. It's amazing, not slower. I mean, you have these companies with $100 billion of revenue growing at 30%, kind of thing. These are growth rates that even startups would be happy with, right? So the network effects are turning data into economies of scale. And so it's very difficult to catch up once you have a leadership position, right? And I always say that Planet Labs, I studied the tech markets for many years, as did my partner here, you. Planet has the largest data lead and largest barrier to entry lead we've seen in our careers. Let me give you an example of that. I mean, they have 180 satellites up that capture the entire Earth's landmass every day. The next biggest, competitor, instead of having 200 satellites in total, they probably have 10 or 20 satellites. And so when you have 10 times more coverage and 100 times more daily data or something like that, I forget the numbers because they're so large. It's very difficult to catch up with Apple or Tesla if you're 1/10 or 1/100th the size. It's theoretically possible, but assuming that competence is distributed evenly and that people, are trying, it's not that easy to catch up when somebody has a factor of 10 or a factor of 100 lead, right? So, I think what's most likely is Planet Labs will look more and more like, Twitter meets Bloomberg, right? Where we're trying to make the data easier. We're also trying to drive a successful subscription business. And we know that there is no other source for the data. And so it's going to be Planet's choice as to how much they do internally versus empower middlemen on the valued services layer. You know, we made an acquisition just a few weeks ago at Planet called Vandersat. It's a business in Holland that focuses on machine learning and agricultural sector. And so you can see that there is a way to take our capital and public listing to accelerate that journey of raw data to low friction solution-based systems and eventually self-serve, right? There will be a day when it will be self-serve. And Planet already empowers that for most of its customers via a website, which is pretty cool. You know, go find your own data, go task a satellite. You can do it through a website, right? So it's really a remarkable company. I mean, Planet set out to do what Apple did to the mobile phone for satellites. So they set out 10 years ago, 11 years ago, to make the cost of a satellite, you know, come down by 2 orders of magnitude and increase the speed to market. And they succeeded. So, you know, they shipped satellites that cost low 7 digits launched, and they have competitors that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to launch one. You know, if one of Planet's satellites has a malfunction, it doesn't matter. They can ship another 20 of them, you know, next month or whatever. The competitors, they lose one, that's, you know, 20% of their business goes away, right? So it's a uniquely disruptive hardware model. It's now become a uniquely disruptive software model. And so in the next 10 years, I expect Planet Labs to go from being Apple, the hardware company, to Apple today, which is increasingly powered by software and services. But as Steve Jobs, you know, once put it, I think, or Alan Kay, I always forget, anyone who's serious about software builds their own hardware. And that is the mindset of Will Marshall and Planet Labs. It's very similar to Elon Musk, you know, at Tesla and SpaceX, and very similar to Steve Jobs. It's like, if you want to end up with the best user experience, you have to control the stack.
I mean, mentioning, you know, the hardware part with the software part of the business makes it a tough business. It's not an easy business, and it's capital intensive. And so do you think that the hype that has been built around space and space SPACs, let's say, has hurt the sector more than helped it?
Well, I mean, I'll stand back for a second. You know, dMY technology hits their pipe forecast. It's something we pride ourselves on. We've run a lot of public companies. We sign a lot of boards. If you look at our pipe forecast and the first earnings call or 2 or 3 after that, you know, we tend to upgrade guidance, and we tend to at least beat, certainly on the revenue anyway. One of the reasons we are the leading SPAC franchise and we have low redemptions and good after close share price performances, we do what we say we're going to do. The market doesn't always reward us for doing that. And so there are moments in time, you know, last month, you know, I think there's a lot of people harvesting capital gains and losses and so on for the end of the year. I think that hurt a couple of our stock prices at dMY. But I'm sure they'll recover because they're fundamentally great businesses, and buying data businesses that are unique is kind of a surefire way to make money in my mind. You can close your eyes and come back 3, 5, 7 years later, and they're going to be bigger. You can debate how much bigger, but they're going to be bigger companies. So you just have to wait. You know, I think that the space SPAC theme has had a lot of supply and a lot of demand for space, but our proposition is unique in the category because we're really a data company that happens to be capturing data of the Earth from space. We're not a tourism company. We're not a transportation company. We're not a Mars exploration company. We're not a satellite communication company. We are really focused on empowering good outcomes, both in the ESG space for governments and industry alike, as well as in agriculture, defense, logistics, you name it, in the Fortune 100, Fortune 1000 space, by using this unique data that you can only capture from looking down at the Earth. So look, I mean, my position on this one is very clear, which is, if you look at the history of industry, data is always where all the value is in the tech industry in the long term. Google's a big data company. Amazon's a big data company, Microsoft, you name it, Amazon, like these are all data companies in the long term, in the long term. There is no profits and very little revenue in my mind of catering for millionaires who want to look at the earth for 35 seconds. That's not a business, okay? I mean, by the way, like this always makes me laugh. Richard Branson's a great guy, but Virgin Atlantic's gone bankrupt 3 times. Like Virgin Galactic, where do you think that's going to end up in the long term? Like, it's going to rhyme with Virgin Atlantic, right? And so the reality here is transportation's a tough business to make money in. Hospitality is a tough business to make money in. There's not a lot of trillion-dollar hotel and restaurant companies, but there are trillion-dollar data companies, including Facebook, right? So I think, Planet is the only space company with 9 figures of revenue. So if you want space and you want 100 million of revenue, it's only us. Virgin has no revenue. Anybody else has 8 figures of revenue. If you want, a safe bet on technology growth and economies of scale, we're a unique data company with 9 figures of revenue growing at double digits that builds our own hardware and our own software. Pretty safe, right? So the reality is, we feel this is a bit, look, this business, Planet Labs, just like all our other ones, INQ, Genius Sports, RSI, these are businesses Warren Buffett would be proud of. You can close your eyes, buy this stock, come back 3, 5, 7 years later, the business will be much bigger. What the stock market pays for that business can fluctuate, but there's no doubt 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now, each one of these businesses will be much, much bigger than it is today and much, much more profitable.
I mean, it's this environment seems to go against today value investing, which you're just mentioning, and they've put, I guess, SPAC as not being value investing, which might have been a mistake as well. You've mentioned your investment in quantum computing, and so do you see in your vision or in your strategy a link between this quantum investment in quantum computing, data, and space? Is that something, a theme that could be developed?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that if Planet Labs saw, a lot of money in satellite, encryption keys for quantum computers, being passed around. I mean, they could do that if they wanted, right? Planet could do a lot of things. They could be in a lot of industries, given that they understand how to build hardware quickly, and they've automated the entire, let's just call it, satellite launch, and let's call it, agile aerospace ecosystem they kind of invented, right? So there's a lot of vectors of growth. It's one of the topics that, the board, which I'm now on, has to debate all the time is which one do you pursue? What will be accelerating the business plan and keeping us on the path to $1 billion of revenue fastest? Quantum computing is a pioneering, it's an edge tech for sure. It's a cutting edge tech business. I'm a physicist originally. I went to Cambridge University and did physics undergrad and grad. And so both Planet Labs and INQ are businesses that are near and dear to my heart. And I've been following their industries for, 10, 20, 25 years in some cases. Both of these companies will be much bigger this decade, and they have the capital, $500 million or more each to succeed, as well as the public currency, as well as consolidation opportunities, and really every chance in the world of being the next NVIDIA, sized business, if you would. But ultimately, look, INQ is focused on building the world's fastest quantum computers, the most commercially successful quantum computers at every generation. Planet Labs already has 9 figures of revenue. I mean, INQ is an 8-figure revenue business in 22, not a 9-figure revenue business. And so it's early in the commercialization cycle. I think it has equally astronomical potential. Both of them have engineering problems, not fundamental science problems to solve. Both of them need to commercialize aggressively, and they have the capital to do that.
if we go back to what you're mentioning about, your approach to the space sector with Planet Labs and how now it's about refining the data and removing the friction points. When you look at the global space ecosystem, have you looked into Europe as well, or you're mainly focused in the US? And what would be your message or your advice for, let's say, the EMEA region to develop more swiftly the space sector in a more swift manner, I would say?
Yeah, I mean, look, I lived in the UK for 16 years. I lived in Italy for 3 years. As I said, I went to university there. So I understand the challenges of building tech companies, in Europe. And it really is that. Building a tech company in Europe has been more difficult than the US for the entire time that I've been watching the tech industry play out. And there's kind of two big reasons for this, in my opinion. I've run a listed company in the UK. I have an Italian passport. I'm an honorary UK citizen. So I have some experience with this. And what makes it challenging to build trillion-dollar tech companies? There's very few $100 billion. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure there's any European $100 billion market cap tech companies, but there's certainly no trillion-dollar companies. And that gap keeps elongating. The US now has a number of trillion-dollar market cap companies, and Europe kind of caps out at 50 billion, 60 billion, 80 billion, something like that. And so the issues are fragmentation of geography and culture, and then access to capital and expected returns. And unfortunately, it's a vicious spiral in both directions. If big markets in China and the US, you can get explosive upside. You can create an Alibaba, you can create an Amazon. And so VCs will pay more for the chance at a $100 billion exit. That means entrepreneurs keep more of their company earlier on. It means more people are willing to take the risk of starting something from scratch, which means VCs have a lot of choices, right? And there's successes at all sizes. In the opposite situation, if you don't have a big market, in the same language, same culture, the outcomes are smaller, the VCs are pickier, the valuations are lower, the entrepreneurs own less money, own less of their company, and they make less money. Fewer people take risk. and so down you go. And so, I think the culture in Europe for entrepreneurialism has improved dramatically in the past 20 years. It used to be, 1995, if you failed as an entrepreneur, I don't think, most people viewed their careers in a lot of trouble. Whereas, as the joke always goes, in Palo Alto, California, it's a badge of honor, nearly, nearly. The next time you start something, you tell a VC, hey, I failed twice before, here's what I learned. People go, that's interesting. If you're going to do the same thing, almost the same thing the third time, we might listen to you this time, right? We might fund you this time, right? So those things come together in a very, in a challenging way in Europe, and they come together, gloriously for China and the US right now. Obviously, the EU is trying to create a single something. The challenge, though, with the EU is, the UK is a lot less in the euro than they used to be. And the reality is, even when the UK was in the zone, the difference between the US and the UK and Europe is, look, if Florida has a lot of construction jobs and a lot of venture capital, you want to start a company, you can move from Arizona to Florida a lot more easily than you're going to go from Paris to Berlin. There's not a lot of Germans that move to France to start a company, and there's not a lot of plumbers or painters or artists that move from France to Germany in reverse going, hey, I'm going to make my life here. And that makes things challenging. To have a successful startup in Europe, you have to have localization and culturalization for all these countries to access the same number of consumers, right? And so I think that's the reality of a space startup as it is for any tech startup in Europe, period.
But I tell you, I agree with you. The things are changing, and even if you look at the space sector, you're having a lot of collaboration between entrepreneurs, and the ESA are doing a lot of initiatives around creating this momentum of one market, because at the end it's space. So it clarifies I don't want to take too much more of your time, but
No,
beyond this satellite, all the modes that you've put through for Planet Labs, do you see another segment within the space sector that is interesting? You knocked off space tourism. Do you see, for example, on-orbit servicing as an interesting proposition, the lunar ecosystem, or do you see that as too far away?
So two things. One, I think Europe should make a really darn good effort at trying to build some success in space, because you're correct. If you can't galvanize a common market around, what's going on up in the heavens, you can't galvanize it for anything. The second thing that Europe has is a tremendous amount of scientific brain power that's underfunded, including my own school. I mean, Cambridge University and Oxford are great schools, but they don't have their own particle accelerator like they do at Stanford, right? Like there is a funding gap between Harvard with whatever, a $40, $50 billion endowment, and Cambridge with the, I don't know, $5 or $10 billion endowment, right? Maybe it's less, I don't know the number. And so the reality is there's a chance to pull together the finest minds to find business models, maybe in the picks and shovels segment of space. Like picks and shovels is not a bad place to be. I mean, you look at the entire German economy almost comes from this Mittelstand, right? Of people supplying parts to the auto ecosystem. And it's been very profitable for a century, literally. Some of the wealthiest people in Europe own these, suppliers to whole segments. And so that, makes sense to me. I can see Italian craftsmen and German craftsmen and, English engineers thinking about how they can supply pieces. And, look, the UK has an aerospace industry. So does Italy. So does Germany. So does France. They can do this. But they've got to figure out how to get away from, we're all going to have our own standard. We're all going to get government funding. We're all going to do our own thing. And it's all about jobs at home. They've got to get off that. They've got to get off that. They've got to say, we're going to fund startups, for space across the EU and employ people, especially now, COVID's forced everybody to be remote. There's no excuse now to not working collaboratively remotely, right? Second thing I'll say is the space ecosystem already has increasingly scaled people in it. So, there are people trying to copy Planet's business model. Some of them have even found a SPAC, okay? But the reality is if you have 5 satellites and we have 205 satellites, our CEO at Planet Labs, Will Marshall, always says, we have 200 real satellites, Niccolo. They have 20 PowerPoint satellites. They intend to have a satellite next year or the year after. He's like, we had 200 last year, right? They're real satellites doing stuff today. It's not a business plan. We have 130 million.
How many years in advance do you think Planet Lab is compared to their competitors? How many years in advance you would say they are?
I think we're 5 to 7 years ahead. Now, it's at least 5 on just the hardware. And then you can argue over the software and the network effects and so on. And that's a long time. How many years ahead is Apple and Samsung from every other smartphone manufacturer? Probably the same. And, Apple is now a $3 trillion market cap company, the first in the history of the planet. And, all they've been doing, seriously, when Steve Jobs launched the iPhone, I love his honesty in saying, we are about 2 years ahead of any competitor. That's what he said. We're about 2 years ahead on capacitive touch resistive screens, BlackBerry and Nokia. That was a 2-year lead. Look at, since he's died, the business is whatever it is, 10 times, 20 times the market cap it was when he passed away, 9 years ago, 8 years, whatever it is, 8.5, 9 years ago. Planet Labs, I think it's seriously at least 5 years. So however big you think data can be, we're going to have, the super majority of the share and a chance to keep hoovering up market share. Because, what people forget is in the tech industry, if you have a 50% market share, there is a very high chance that in 5 years, you're going to have an 80% market share, because to grow 5% a year, 10% a year when you have 50, you have to swallow everybody else's business, either buy it or organically grow it or build it or whatever, right? So Planet's going to keep growing. But my point on this one is, look, SpaceX, they have scale. They have access to capital. They can raise money. They have an ability to take things into orbit, including, Planet Labs has 10 rocket launch partnerships, I think, but a lot of it goes to SpaceX, and Will Marshall and Elon Musk are friendly. And so they can launch things into orbit. They have a real chance at dominating the asteroid economy, the Martian economy, whatever you want to call it, the lunar economy. There are other businesses, that have a lead, whether it's what Mr. Bezos is backing or, right? There's other rocketry companies that have an advantage. So you have to be smart, in my mind, to pick your battles where you have enough time and enough leadership and a large enough addressable market to build a substantive company. And that's why, to sort of take this back to where I started a few minutes ago, what dMY always looks for is a big lead in business and technology, a big addressable market, and a lot of ways to win, a lot of customers we can sell to, a lot of ways to go to market. If you have those three things, you can buy the stock, close your eyes, and come back, and it's going to be successful. The question is only how long you have to hold it to get the return you want.
Very clear. Niccolo, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and your insights. And hopefully we'll hear about your next SPAC soon, and hopefully it will be into space again.
Thank you, sir. Look forward to seeing you again.
Likewise.